residential school survivor. I am a thriver, okay. He told me, my little girl, put on your dress, okay? Oh, I was so proud of this little dress, you know, made out of flower bags, it's all nice and flowery. So I sat beside him on the buckboard, and we had about 6 miles to go, you know, through the bush. He was very quiet, you know, and I'd look at him wondering what was going on. So we get to this, oh, I'm just happy, I'm going to see my sisters, you know. And we get around the bend in this great big red, you know, building. He took my hand, come with me, he said. And there was children on the veranda. And my sister was around the corner. She didn't want to see this, okay? So anyway, you know, and he left me, you know, he let go of me, and then he started walking down the gravel part to the horses. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, he's leaving me here. He's forgetting me. I broke away from Pauline. Oh my goodness sakes, I ran after him, you know. Anyway, he started hitting the horses to get away from me. He couldn't get away, and he stopped his horses. And he got off the buckboard. He come at the back, and he picked me up. And he said, I can't take you with me, girl. And he said, why? Can I go home with you? No. No, yeah, he said. Why? I said, we'll go to jail. We can't keep you children at home, he said. You got to stay here. And I looked at my dad. I never saw my dad crying. My dad was crying. And he drove away.
And that's your grandma with them?
Yeah, it was beautiful. Mom was the matriarch, okay? My dad was, how shall I say, a very quiet man, but in my own way, he was a teacher. He took us on nature tours, you know. At one time I went with them to pick berries, okay? It's one of the things, social things that we did. So driving a team of horses, you know, and a wagon and a buckboard, and they were talking Cree to one another. And it's like osmosis. Although I didn't really understand them, but you can get the gist of what they were saying. And I heard them say, isn't she beautiful, you know? And I thought to myself, that was so wonderful. I knew I was loved. We were always punished, okay, for trivial things. You step out of line, you get cuffed on your ears, okay? I guess we tried our best to learn, but I couldn't learn, you know? I didn't want to learn. I was depressed. I believe there's childhood depression, okay? Because my mind was not on my books. I'd look out the window, nice green grass, bright sun, you know, and whatnot. I showed my report card to my dad. You can learn, he says. Are these your grades? I said, yeah. And he, what do you want to do with that? I said, I think I want to go on to school, you know. So I learned a little bit about nursing. Workers, staff in the kitchen would call me names, you know, being who I was, all that.
What kind of names?
Huh?
What kind of names?
Dirty Indian. Go back to your teepee. But you see, I think they might have been jealous because I had a nice uniform, white socks, you know, white shoes. I was special, I think. And I had to get friendly with the other, you know, classmates. And there was about 4 or 5 that befriended me, you know, that helped me see around and whatnot. And they're my dearest friends today. And if I saw Aboriginal people, non-Indigenous people, okay, come in, I used to, you know, sidle up to them because I know they were scared, eh? I was instrumental in getting the hospital to get interpreters, okay? One of the things I didn't like, they came in with tags on them, you know, names. Oh, God. That's offensive, you know, that's like what they do for animals in a stockyard. So that was discontinued, you know.
You got that discontinued? In the 60s?
Yeah. And I think for myself that I excelled, okay? Because I think I had that warm bedside, you know, manner. At least my patients told me. You meet discrimination. It's very subtle, okay? You're left out, okay? You're avoided. Okay, well, that's all right. I've been avoided all my life in, in non-Aboriginal community.
That's a good one.
That's when I got my
doc-
name, Ann Thomas Building.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What was it like being told that you're going to have a building named after you?
I was very surprised, okay? Why? Why me? You know, kind of thing. Supposed to be humble.
A young boy trying to escape. It was 1966 when Chani Wenjack ran away from a residential school. His body was found near railroad tracks a week later. He was only 12. A New Heritage Minute tells his story through the voice of his sister Pearl.
I survived residential school. My brother Johnny did not.
For John Custer, watching it brings back painful memories of his own experience.
Many times boys would run away, the girls would run away, and if we were caught, they would shave our heads and beat the hell out of you.
Custer was one of more than 150,000 children forced to attend residential school in the 19th and 20th centuries. He's now part of a group that holds an annual reunion for survivors and their families. He believes there are still people who don't fully know what really happened.
It was a reality. For me, it's nice to talk about it once in a while to get rid of it.
The Minute was written by Canadian author Joseph Boyden.
Seeing that little boy on the railroad track dead because he went to a school that was supposed to give him an education is very disturbing.
They forced him to go to the Indian residential school.
Doris Young was a member of an advisory committee with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and spent years in residential school. She says while this might help educate, she would prefer to see something positive launch on Aboriginal Day.
We're supposed to be out there dancing and making, you know, telling our children what wonderful people they are.
For Historica Canada, it's important to recognize all parts of Canadian history to move forward.
Only by understanding those mistakes, those things we've done poorly in our history, those things of which we're less proud, do we improve as a country.
In 1966, Chani Wenjack's death triggered the first inquest into the treatment of students at residential schools, but his family wasn't allowed to attend. Alana Cole, CBC News, Winnipeg.
I got frightened when I was a little girl, when the principal used to beat up beat up the other children like boys. The boys got the most beating. They used to call it bench party, and it was usually done after supper. And that's where I got frightened, because I saw blood.
I remember when we had to shower. You only have to show me how to shower and clean and wash myself, how to wash my private and my, private parts of your body. You only have to show a kid once or twice at the most, but not every day. And have the supervisor come in there and basically take advantage of you.
I just remember arriving there and donning new clothes and, of course, getting a haircut and sitting in a classroom and being with other girls and witnessing my brother get punched by the supervisor.
My name is Alice Little Deer. I'm 78 years old. I spent about 8 years in residential school.
My name is Raymond Mason. I'm 62 years old, and I attended residential school for 12 years.
I'm Madeline Dion Stout. I'm 62 years old. I'm from the Kihiwan First Nation in Alberta. I attended Blue Quills Residential School for 36 consecutive months. That would be 3 years.
In order to educate the children properly, we must separate them from their families. Some people may say that this is hard, but if we want to civilize them, we must do that. A federal cabinet minister, 1883.
I remember them taking me away from my mother and my stepfather. And I can hear them telling my mom that that was the best thing for me, and that not to worry, I would be looked after.
Our parents didn't want to worry us unduly and tell us and warn us that we are going to be separated for a long, long time with barely a visit.
I see him come around, Indian agent in a boat, with the principal, then collect some children from the reserve. Mm-hmm. Then he would come back again, come and take some more.
So the next day, I woke up with hundreds of total strangers, my size, my age, and not knowing, what are they doing with all of us here? Why are there's so many of us here, and that's where a lot of my whole life really started to change, because I got strapped, I got beaten up for speaking my own native tongue. I even had my tongue pulled out and pinched,
My strongest memory there is when the little girl died beside me. She must have been about 6. I was scared why the parents were not there. That's what I was scared about. And I knew they wouldn't feel comfortable for not being there when their daughter's dying.
And do you know why they weren't there?
They were never notified.
Indian children in the residential schools die at a much higher rate than in their villages. But this does not justify a change in the policy of this department, which is geared towards a final solution of our Indian problem. Duncan Campbell Scott, Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs.
At that time, they never told us that our sisters were across the hallway. And I didn't know that for the longest time. Then I spotted my sister, Nora, and I was so glad and so hysteric, and I went running to her and I reached onto her, and just hugged her, and I was just shaking, and terrified. And I was wondering why she was pushing me away. I didn't realize that we weren't supposed to know that we both lived in the same place, and we weren't allowed to speak to each other. We weren't allowed to talk to each other. And I can remember the principal grabbing a hold of me by the hand, and I was jumping off the floor like that, and he stripped me. And he started whacking me with a long webbed strap. He was setting an example that, if you do this, is what's going to happen to you. And all the other boys were watching, and the girls were still going through.
Their education must consist not merely training of the mind, but of a weaning from the habits and feelings of their ancestors, and the acquirements of the language, art, and customs of civilized life. Edgerton Ryerson, 1847 Report for Indian Affairs.
Visits from my parents were very rare, but I do recall one visit when my mother and father came. And I remember specifically my mother's red tam, that splash of color. I remember her getting out of the wagon, and I was crying already watching them because I was missing them already. They hadn't even walked through the door yet of the residential school, but I was missing them already. And when they were actually leaving, I cried until my nose bled.
And you learn pretty quick after getting those kind of beatings. Not strapping, it's literally beatings, And ever since that day, I tried to run away. And I made friends with a guy by the name of Donald Atkinson from Rosa River First Nation. And we planned, to take off. And when we got caught, we paid for dearly, Not only did the RCMP give us a licking, but the bigger boys that was helping them chase us down.
Were you angry at your parents that they made you go to school?
Sometimes I would think about them. I get mad for all giving me here, sending me over there where all the bad treatment is. And
Tell me how you felt when you saw your children go to that school.
well, I felt sad. My first two boys went, and then a couple of years after, the next two boys went, and so on, as they got older, yeah. I told them to be strong. I had always told them to be strong, to be able to take it like the other children.
So you sent 11 kids to residential school?
Mm-hmm.
How many of them do you think were strong through that?
None of them. None of them.
What about your children? How do you think it affected them being in residential
Well,
school?
like I said, a little bit crazier than before they went to school. Their mind was a little bit more intact, staying at home with us. They knew how to hunt ducks, and they knew how to fish, and they knew how to snare rabbits and pick blueberries. Today you don't see that.
And you think that's the school?
Yeah. Everything destroyed in our world. We didn't bother white people. White people bothered me.
Indian culture is a contradiction in terms. They are uncivilized. The aim of education is to destroy the Indian. Nicholas Flood David Report, 1879.
There are three reasons why I think residential schools are a blot on the Canadian landscape. One is that we became strangers in our home and native land. Two is that nurturing relationships between parents and children were severed. Residential schools were a frontal attack on parenthood. Three is that it added to our mental stress in a very real way.
My name is Michael Loft. I'm from Kahnawake. I'm 55 years old, okay, and my dad attended residential school for 11 continuous years in Spanish, Ontario. He says, and once he told me a story where they were so bored, they were in I think the cafeteria, and they would just walk in a circle, you know, because they couldn't just go run around, you know, willy-nilly all over the residential school just because school was out. They had to be controlled, I guess, had to be contained, and so they would walk in circles, you know, in the cafeteria, round and round and round and round, to deal with their boredom.
My name's Lorena Fontaine. I'm 38 years old, and both my parents and grandparents went to residential school. I was at a conference that my mom was speaking at. She was giving the keynote address, and she started talking about her residential school experience during her speech. And and that's how I found out. Well, I was, of course, I was shocked and appalled, and I just felt so terrible for her. I felt frozen when I was listening to her. And it wasn't until after she finished speaking that I started thinking about our family life. I started thinking about the abuse that was very prevalent when I was a child. And I started putting connections together.
He never knew when he was going to get hit in residential school. That's the thing. So he lived like in fear of getting hit. You break a rule, you get whacked, you know. So it was unpredictable. You know, you couldn't. You could try to learn the rules as best as you could, but I mean, you're a kid. You know, you'd mess up and whack. You know. So there was that unpredictability that he brought home too, and the same thing with us. We didn't know what was going to happen. You know, next. So it was scary.
I was raised by parents who never had a childhood, and they didn't have any parents as role models. So we were vulnerable children, and a lot of us were abused ourselves as young children. And I also realized at that point that one of the people who abused me in my family had been a residential school survivor, a family member, and I understood why now, why I was abused.
The great aim of our legislation has been to do away with the tribal system and to assimilate the Indian people in all respects. Sir John A. Macdonald, May 2nd, 1887.
He got out, you know, like everybody gets out at 16, and he eventually made his way to Aguesasne, to his home, and he told me that he couldn't connect with them. He couldn't connect because he couldn't speak the language. He didn't understand the culture. So he couldn't take it, you know. He was frustrated. He was going nowhere. So he went back to the residential school for one more year because it seemed like that was home now. That was home. And that's where he could, you know, they spoke his language, and so that's where he went.
I grew up not knowing my language, and in fact, I kind of felt a bit ashamed about our language and our identity because it seemed like they were, meaning my parents and my aunts and uncles, were ashamed too in some way because they didn't want to talk about it and they didn't want to share with us about who we were.
there was a lot of fear. I think the fear that they put in him, the terror that they put in him. I mean, he managed to bring that with him, and it went into our family, you know. And I learned terror and fear and all that as well as a child. I put fear in my sons too. That's all I knew, you know. When they were doing something that was right, I would put fear in them, you know.
Our objective is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question and no Indian department. Duncan Campbell Scott, Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs, January 1st, 1920.
Generally, the survivors of residential school do not commit suicide any more than the general population. Okay. It's the children of the residential school survivors who commit suicide in incredibly high numbers. You know, 6 to 7 times, you know, the provincial average. Okay.
It might just take one person to start talking about it, or perhaps a family to start talking about the fact that there is abuse, and the reason why there's that abuse is because of the residential school experience. That, you know, we're not abusive people by trade. We're not, we weren't born that way. And to be able to, I think families need to be able to realize that they're not alone, that none of us are alone anymore, that we have each other, and that it's okay to start talking about it.
We don't have the monopoly on pain and hurt, but we have and have carried a disproportionate share of it over time. And I would really like us to move forward, not to erase our memory of who we are, because residential school is certainly a part of who we are. I'd like us all to be a part of a team that really makes a lasting difference for not only residential school survivors, but the other little children who are having difficulties today.